Morning, glory, and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt on this Thanksgiving Eve. I'm thankful for your listening to me. Thank you for joining me today. Prayers for the National Guardsmen who were shot in downtown D.C. at Farragut Square, which is known to me and my guest, Jordan Hirsch, as being a place that normally you wouldn't think twice about walking through. Jordan is a senior counselor to the CEO of Palantir. The name may be familiar to you because Jordan was on just a week ago talking about Palantir's meritocracy scholarship. But in the interim, he sent me an article that he's written for the Sapir Journal, Sapir, S-A-P-I-R, which is edited by our friend Brett Stevens of the New York Times. And the article is titled The Need for a Jewish Sovereign Wealth Fund. And I read it, I inhaled it actually today when it arrived, and I put a note out to Jordan. Hey, Jordan, why don't you come on today and talk to me about this? And he was quick as a bug and said, okay, I'll do that. Let me check with the team. So let's first tell them this is a run-up to a debate. Jordan, welcome. Tell them what the debate is going to be about and how they can participate in it.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me back on, Hugh. It's a pleasure and an honor. Really appreciate it. The debate is going to be about the merits of the article, which we'll get into in a minute. It's being hosted by Sapir. Brett will be moderating, and I will be debating Roger Zakheim, who runs the Reagan Institute and Presidential Library, the institute part of that an institution, and we will be debating whether or not it's a good idea, what I propose in the article. And you can sign up by going to sapirjournal.org/events. It will be the first event there, and click on register now. That's sapirjournal.org/events, and click register now. And hopefully we'll be able to give you a good reason to come on the show and go watch the debate.
Now, Jordan, I want to start by I have a lot of knowledge that is not been put into evidence yet because I listen to the commentary podcast every day. And they have had a long running debate about whether American Jewry has got to redirect their philanthropy. Bill Ackman sort of kicked this off when Harvard went off the rails, and a number of people followed it. And John Podhoretz is very, very happy to say, stop giving money to anti-Semitic institutions. Your article is the next step, and it's based upon a historical model. Can you explain the historical model and where it's failed in the past and why we ought not to just wait for it to fail in America again?
Yeah, that's a great question, Hugh. One of the questions I get a lot from friends in the conservative ecosystem who are friendly to the Jewish community in America, but they scratch their heads and they wonder, why do American Jews give to the causes and the institutions that they give to? It doesn't seem to make much sense. In fact, it seems against self-interest. And this is the reason why. This history is the reason why. The Jewish community, as many of your listeners may know, was exiled from the land of Israel and by the Romans around the year 66. And ever since then, the Jews have largely been in diaspora, meaning outside of the homeland, until, of course, 1948. And now about half the Jewish world is in Israel, and about half the Jewish world is outside of Israel. Up until 1948, the Jewish communities all around the world had to find a way to integrate with and live with the powers that be in the lands which they lived. So that could have been Spain or Italy, it could have been North Africa, it could be Poland or Germany. Interestingly enough, a very similar strategy cropped up across the Jewish world in the Middle East and in Europe, and it stretches across time, across those 2,000 years. And the concept was one known as, in Yiddish, Stadler, and that means in English, intercessor. The model involved a leading member of the Jewish community basically playing the role of communal representative to the court, whether that be the literal court or the court as we might think of it today in American politics, the powers that be in the governing class. And up until the advent of America and American democracy, that usually involved a trade-off. The intercessor would trade his skills and resources and reach in exchange for rights that were not otherwise granted to the Jewish community. So it was effectively, I will do some things for you, and you will protect the Jewish community from pogroms and anti-Semitic violence. That model prevailed for the past 2,000 years, and it was largely successful in fits and spurts throughout, except when it wasn't. And we can talk more about
Huh.
that in a minute. But that was effectively the survival mechanism of the Jewish community for the last 2,000 years.
Now, what I want to explain to the audience, because I'm assuming, I just talked about this with Danny Pletka, there's a general ignorance of history, and Jewish history is a subset of history, but there's a general ignorance of Jewish history from the time that the Jews lived in their native land in Jerusalem and environs, in the ancient kingdoms of Judea and Israel. They were successively taken captive and dispersed, and returned and taken captive and dispersed, and then returned until the Romans just burned it all down, and they went everywhere in the world except for a very small group of Jews that always remained in Jerusalem. Places that they went would receive them like England for a period of time, and then they would get booted out. And I mean wholesale exclusion. Or in Spain, they would be allowed to live in the Catholic country of Spain until they were obliged to leave or convert. And that's happened again and again and again. Russia was in the late 1800s the scene of many pogroms, which were massive and violent. And that's when Zionism became an idea. Theodore Herzl said, look, this is not going to work. We need a land of our own. And that's when Zionism began. I think the first Zionist Congress is in 1897. And
That's right.
it takes, 1897 and 1948 to make it happen in the general decolonization effort. But Jews went back to Israel under the British mandate, even though the Brits weren't particularly good or welcoming at doing that. But here in the United States, the people that left Russia and Europe right up until World War II, they came to America when they ran into our quota system because of anti-Semites at the State Department. And what did they do in America as opposed to in England and Spain?
Yeah, great question. So what I would argue is a lot of people in the Jewish community would think we did something very different in America in terms of our relationships with the powers that be. And part of that is the blessings of American democracy, which was much less tribal, much more welcoming of different ethnic groups, and had a desire to integrate all of the people that were entering the body politic. By and large, obviously there were exceptions. But the Jewish community benefited enormously from that, as did other immigrant communities, Italian and Irish and what have you. But what I would argue is instead of doing something different, which would have been nice, what the Jewish community did here was reproduce the Stadlernoot model at scale. So you didn't necessarily have one person who was the intercessor on behalf of the Jewish community to the American government. But what the Jewish community did here, in order to really embed itself and show in a lot of ways that they were model Americans, was they built institutions in the Jewish community that consciously mirrored the institutions in the society around them, in American society. So, for example, you have Congress, the Jewish community develops the World Jewish Congress. You have the State Department. You have the Jewish community develops something called the American Jewish Committee, which still exists today. It sort of informally calls itself the State Department of the Jewish people. It's the diplomatic representative of the community both within the country and abroad. And so a giant mirror imaging takes place, and the Jewish community, as part of a survival mechanism and also out of gratitude, really binds itself to the institutions that come to dominate American life throughout the mid-century period and really the golden age of American power in the world. And I think what's happening now is, as you see the breakdown in American institutions and the lack of social trust, the lack of trust in American institutions, that is having a boomerang effect on the Jewish community, which is seen by many as one of the most institutionally intertwined communities in the country. I think quite rightly, honestly, because that was part of what the community set out to do.
What is very thought provoking about your article, and I had not considered it before, is that the alarming rise of anti Semitism, some on the right, a lot on the left, is not so much the old anti Semitism of the Protocols of the Elder of Zion, but the anti-establishmentarianism writ large. They're against the Jews on the fringes because the Jews are the establishment. Is that a fair summary of your thesis?
Yeah, what I would say is, look, I'm sympathetic to many in the Jewish community who have a hard time disaggregating between various kinds of anti-Jewish sentiment out there. It's very clear that there are people who suffer from what I call in the piece a kind of Jewish derangement syndrome, where they do blame
Right.
everything on the Jews, and it does have the protocols flavor, and you find that on the left and on the right. But I would say what the Jewish community misses, and for reasons I'm sympathetic to, because it's very hard when this is such an emotionally charged issue and an issue of safety to get nuanced about it. They miss that there are some distinctions between the deranged, the kind of people suffering from Jewish derangement syndrome, and the people who are really skeptical of institutions as such. and they're not really skeptical or anti-Semitic in essence, but they end up in a place of questioning the role of Jews in the United States because they look and see that Jews are very closely tied to the institutions that they distrust. I think a big part of this is that we're dealing with post-COVID hangover and distrust from what happened over the last 5 years, and that has left the Jewish community in a very precarious place because uh, I think the Jewish community's instinct is to seek shelter in the institutions that are themselves collapsing and causing part of this problem. So what my article is an attempt to do is really
Stand
break
by,
this
Jordan. We'll
cycle
come
and help
back with
people
the
understand.
thesis. We'll come back with the
Okay.
thesis right after this break. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. During the break, the West Virginia governor, Pat Morrisey, put out a statement that both National Guardsmen were dead and then retracted it. There are conflicting reports. Continue to pray for them. There's also a report in the Wall Street Journal that the shooting took place at the junction of 17th and H Street, which is 1 block from the Capitol, not Farragut, 1 block from the White House, not Farragut Square. So again, first reports are almost always incomplete at best and usually wrong. I'll continue to wait and bring you news as it comes up. I'm back with Jordan Hirsch. He got a fabulous new article in Sapir, the Journal of Sapir, The Need for a Jewish Sovereign Wealth Fund. If I can, Jordan, I want to read 3 paragraphs. Trust in government and media is at a historic low, you write. Confidence in higher education is similarly plummeted. Almost no institution in American life remains broadly admired. Top tier talent fled those bodies. Their husks have been occupied in many cases by second-rate navel-gazing functionary cosplaying radicals and clenched fish commissars. In turn, Americans are rejecting the collective order that governed the country for decades. Amid this decline, anti-establishment forces, podcasters, social media streamers, political brawlers have surged into the cultural mainstream. Commentators reach into a total audience, global audience, from Substacks and garage studios. Candidates win primaries with TikTok clips and Rumble shows. The anti-institutionalists hail from all sides of the political spectrum, ranging from the stoutly centrist to the proudly conspiracist, and often virulently oppose each other, but collectively they owe nothing to credentialed expert, pledge loyalty to no hierarchy, and instinctively distrust anything and anyone associated with the old line establishment. America's Jews, unapologetically identified as they have become with American social, cultural, and political norms and institutions, are the frontline targets in the assault on those same norms and institutions. As in earlier diasporas, an increase in Jew hatred is a worrisome indicator of a broader civilizational decay, and lately that decay is being intentionally accelerated by this proverbial army of anti-institutional forces, which are often, at best, indifferent to Jewish interests, if not openly hostile to them. That's provocative. It's also, I think, persuasive. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but all of the people who have monetized their absurdity are taking aim at the same targets. That doesn't matter where they're shooting from, they're all shooting at the same targets.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem is the institutions which are already flabby and lack self-confidence are now getting attacked on all sides. And let's just say that they're not being run by Napoleon, who can split his forces and attack. When you're being shot at from all sides, it's very overwhelming to begin with, and you're dealing with a dispirited and demotivated class, an elite class in this country that feels maybe in a self-inflicted sort of way that it has lost its mandate. And I think into this vacuum step a whole new cluster of voices. Some of them great, by the way. Some of them more dangerous to the republic. And we're going to be dealing with the chaos of that for probably I would say the next 5 to 10 years before things start to settle out again.
Until we re-credential a serious group of people who actually earn the trust of the people with whom they are speaking. You add,
That's
to
right.
survive in this new world, we, Jews, must rid ourselves of the enmeshment currency and trade autonomy for something better, sovereignty. Explain what you mean by that, Jordan Hirsch.
Yeah, the Stadler-Newt model, which I talked about, the intercessor model, was about gaining favor with the powers that be in the land and trading something that we had to offer for their protection and their grace. My argument in this article is that in an increasingly tribal America, the Jewish community needs to show its value. It can't simply rely on loyalty and good feeling and the post-war halo, quite frankly, that existed around the Jewish community, for which we were very blessed. It now needs to show that it is going to invest in America, that it has something special to offer, and the way in which it has been allocating its resources isn't going to cut it in that regard.
How would you recommend they allocate their resources? A, collect their resources, organize their resources, and allocate their resources.
Yeah, the Jewish community's giving, by and large, has been nonprofit in focus. So that stems from the universities, where there are many endowed chairs and endowed wings and buildings, all the way down to soup kitchens, and all of that is great. This is not necessarily an argument against nonprofit giving. The Jewish community should remain as charitable as ever, and I think it's an important value. That said, I don't think it's the currency that speaks to the current moment. The currency that speaks to the current moment is authenticity. And we need to show as a community that we are going to invest in the hard power of the United States, I think, first and foremost. So, what does that mean? Number one, it means investing in things that matter most to America in terms of real resources and that's really strategic. So I'm talking about making sure that the American supply chain is secure and resilient from other forces like China, Russia, Iran, et cetera, et cetera. It means investing in rare earths. It means investing in critical minerals and things of that nature. That's a very different model than the Jewish community has ever done before, at least as a collective body. Obviously, there are individual Jewish investors who invest in these things all the time, but to do it collectively and to say to the world, in a sense, that this is how we're going to do it, I think would mark an important shift. The other thing I call for is lifting the burden from asking the U.S. taxpayer to support foreign aid to Israel, which I would say is not actually a very high number if you look at it, right? But politically, I think the foreign aid in general and aid to Israel in particular has become something of an albatross. And as necessary as it is, I think there are ways that the Jewish community in America can step up to displace that and make it so that the two countries are on an equal footing and less on a client state relationship, which is I think what has prevailed to this point, at least over the last 20 or 30 years, which I would say has been bad for both Washington and Jerusalem in a sense.
Well, the numbers are astonishing. You cite one study between 2000 and 2015. Jewish organizations donated more than $46 billion to charitable organizations in the United States. According to historian Jack Wertheimer, Jews donated between 13 billion and 14 billion per year to Jewish causes in the early 2020s. Dan Senor, friend of the program and of course host of Call Me Back, noted of 33 Jewish individuals on the Forbes 400 list with publicly reported charitable giving, no more than 11% of that went to Jewish causes, meaning they gave most of that to Gentile or non or to secular causes. What would you have them do? Would you have them organize and start, for example, if Anduril goes public, buy a whole bunch of Anduril and be seen as being part of the American defense superstructure?
That's exactly right, Hugh. I think it's first of all, I think you can see in that kind of giving exactly what I was talking about earlier. The Jewish community gives, by and large, most of its money to causes that support the broader American community, not just the Jewish community. And that's been an effort on the Jewish community to show that we are grateful for this country, that we are proud American citizens, and that we want to give back all of the bounty that we've been able to gain as a community by living in this country, by being accepted in this country. And I think that will always remain. I think what I'm arguing is we need to show a different kind of a different way of expressing our gratitude. And the Andrew example is a perfect one. Another might be, let's say we're lacking in TNT production. Let's fund a new TNT factory. That's kind of things that are very tangible and about hard power.
I'll be right back for one more segment with Jordan Hirsch. His article is at Sapir. We'll find out during the break if it's online. But the debate between he and Roger Zakim of the Reagan Institute will be next a week from Monday, December 8th, on Zoom. More about that when we come back. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'm back with Jordan Hirsch. I will bring updates on the shooting of the National Guardsman after the next break. It's interesting, at 17th and 8th, 2 days ago, I ran into Roger Zakim, who you're going to be debating on December 8th about this, Jordan. I don't envy his task in this, but you were kind enough to include the best argument against your argument in your article. I always respect an article that does that. When you write, at the most elemental level, many may worry that by so openly flaunting our financial prowess, a wealth fund would in fact inflame Jew hatred. I expect Roger to make that argument. How are you going to answer that, Jordan?
I expect him to do so too. Well, I think Roger, I don't want to prejudice the debate, but I think he's holding on to a world that I wish still existed but doesn't anymore. My main argument here is that the coin of the realm in today's America isn't anything other than authenticity. I think what makes the anti-institutionalists matter than anything else about the way that Jews engage in political activism in this country isn't that they have power or that they use money to try to get involved in politics. It's that it seems to them that we hide that sometimes behind mediating institutions because it seemed uncouth, and it did, and back in the day, seem uncouth to be openly flaunting your financial prowess in that sort of way, and nobody really did it. But again, I think the culture has shifted, and this is something the Jewish community has to get on top of now, or risk falling into the same trap as previous diasporas as far as its level of acceptance in the United States. It is much better to be open, legible, and authentic than it is to try to hide and pretend like it's not us or it's somehow it's the institution. It's better to be out in the open in this modern culture, I think.
So, is the argument the best way for Jews to thrive in America is to do so proudly and openly as Jews?
That's exactly right. Couldn't say it better myself. Proudly and openly as Jews, and showing that we really mean it when we say we want to contribute to the revitalization of the United States, that this is our home, and that we're going to invest in it with all of this capital in a way that really matters to Americans right now.
That appeals to me. Now, an aside question, not one you cover. I tend to dismiss anti Semitism in America as the work of a handful of cranks on the right and a group of dummies on the left. And I doubt that they number 50 people that you would know. They might not even number 20. How serious a problem do you think anti Semitism is in America?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's complicated. I think if you look at what happened on X over the weekend with a move that I would applaud very much, which is the geographic location that's been applied to all these accounts that you can now see, you see to some degree that a lot of the anti-Jewish sentiment and frankly the anti-American sentiment, these two things go hand in hand almost 100% of the time, is foreign operations. It's people in
Right.
basements in Pakistan and various Eastern European countries. That said, I do think that there is a legitimate rise in anti-Jewish sentiment on both sides of the aisle. You only have to look at the election of Mayor Mamdani, Mayor-elect Mamdani, for an example of that, or at least people who don't care so much about the Jewish community in New York, such that they don't mind voting for Mamdani for other reasons. And I think you see some of that, although I think a much greater institutional pushback in the Republican Party against some of those currents in the Republican Party. So I think it's a mixed bag. I think what often happens in these cases, there is something organic. Foreign countries try to jump on it and take advantage of it. They can't do it on their own. So I don't want to say that it's not there. I do think it's a legitimate problem. I don't think it's necessarily just a bunch of cranks. And unfortunately, I think the media ecosystem as it exists today really incentivizes the most extreme voices as clickbait, and I think these foreign countries are taking advantage of it. So it's
Now,
important for us to
now
push back and be reactive to it.
Jordan, a quick question. It has always been my policy never to mention the cranks. I don't give them platforms. I don't want to debate them. I'm not interested in what their point of view is. I view them as ignorant and generally sometimes mentally ill. Do you think, I don't name and shame, in other words, I ignore. Is that the preferred way, or do you prefer to name and shame?
Look, I think lots of different approaches are going to work here. I'm with you, Hugh, and I don't name names in my article. I think the names are less important than the trends, quite frankly. And if it wasn't these several individuals, it might be other people who come and step into the gap. We're dealing with a pattern of history that we're living through as a country right now, and so it makes sense to me that this would be happening in the wake of COVID, in the wake of the collapse of trust in institutions. And so that to me is the more important thing. I think focusing on individuals can be a distraction, but there are going to be people who do try to take these people head on, and And I think it's okay to have a multi-pronged approach here.
Jordan Hirsch, thank you for joining me. The Need for a Jewish Sovereign Wealth Fund is the article. If you follow me on X, I have put a link to the article and a link to the registration form for December 8th at noon when Roger Zakim and Jordan debate this with Brett Stevens acting as moderator. It's going to be very interesting to watch that. Have a great Thanksgiving, Jordan. Thanks for spending time on short notice with me. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be back with an update from D.C. Stay tuned.